Welcome everyone. We're so excited that you're able to come here and join us today. So we're here to talk about using the device enrollment program with pre-stage enrollments, and this is a how-to session on the future of Mac management. So if you were hoping for a totally different session, now's the time to go ahead and get where you need to be. Otherwise, let's go ahead and talk about why we are here today. So show of hands, how many of you find the experience of removing the plastic and unboxing that MacBook and going through that setup assistant to get really old after maybe the third time? Maybe, how about the fifth time? Yeah. So I think we can all agree, when we are going through and we're doing that repetitive task of setting up those Macs, it gets super old. It's anything but magical. But when it's our own personal Macs, that's totally different. When I get my brand new Mac, it's fun and exciting to actually go through and do all of that. So why don't we let our end users actually experience that magical moment of unboxing and setting up their own Mac, while our IT teams can focus on other projects that might be more pressing and not nearly as repetitive. And what's also nice is, even though this did say that this is the future of Mac management, this is something you can actually get started with today. You don't have to wait, and we're hoping that this will help you get started on what you need to get this in your environment. Now, before I go on to my next slide here, I did want to tell just a short story about an old coworker of mine. About 5 years ago, I had a coworker who would travel quite a bit to visit customers on site. And while he was at this particular location, he had his MacBook stolen the night before. And as you can imagine, that would be incredibly stressful, knowing that your Mac is gone, you have to present this to a customer tomorrow, what are you going to do? Well, what he did, he went to the nearest Apple store, purchased a Mac under the Jamf account, went back to his hotel, unboxed it, went through that custom setup assistant, and at that point, he was managed and enrolled into Jamf's production server. He then was able to get his Jamf email back, and SelfService allowed him to re-download his applications that he needed. That next morning, he went on site to visit the customer. They had no idea that he had such a stressful night. So DEP is really great, not only as that wonderful, magical experience, but also having that nice security blanket that if something were to go wrong, our end users can get back up and running and get back to their jobs as quick as possible. So that's a little bit about why we are here today. And at this point, you might be wondering who's actually talking today. So my name is Kelly Watkins Conrad. I'm a sales engineer here at Jamf, and I've been at Jamf for almost 6 years now. And for about 5 of those years, I was with our awesome support department as a technical account manager. So if any of you used to have me as your support person, I look forward to getting to hang out with you a little bit later today. In my current role as a sales engineer, I have a lot of conversations about the device enrollment program and how people can get started. So I'm very excited to be able to talk about that today. But that's enough about me. I would like to go ahead and introduce my co-presenter, Yannis.
Hi, I'm Yannis Lagogiannis. I'm the Apple Systems Specialist at the London School of Economics. We're a UK higher education institution, and I will be talking to you later about our real-life challenges in our journey in implementing DEP over the last 3 years.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yannis. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what we are actually going to be seeing today. So first, we're going to have a little live demo, as we call it, on what this looks like for the end user to experience DEP on their machine. After that, we will then show you how you can set this up in Jamf and what the requirements are to get involved. After that, we'll invite Yannis back up to talk about his real-world experience of actually using DEP in a real-world environment. After that, we will then talk about when it makes sense for a Mac to use DEP and when it doesn't. Keeping in mind that it's not an all or nothing, you can absolutely have a mix of some Macs that can use DEP and some where it may not be the best workflow. And then at the end, we do want to leave some time for you to be able to ask us some questions. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and show you what this looks like for the end user. So here I have my computer, and I'm going to go ahead and have this wiped. I'm going to go ahead, select my country, select my keyboard. In this configuration available that you see here, this lets us know that our computer has communicated back to Apple and has seen that it has special instructions. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hit continue on this. And what will happen is that it will say we want the location services to be shown. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up my local user account. And what you will notice is after I have my local account set up, there's nothing else that shows up. So all those other slides that you would expect to see, I decided to have hidden from our user. So now we have been managed and enrolled. I get to my desktop, and now I'm decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get what I need in order to continue doing my job. So I'll go to the applications folder, and I'm going to go ahead and find SelfService. So SelfService comes down once our computer is managed and enrolled into our Jamf server. And now our brand new Jamf Pro version 10 SelfService comes up. So all the fancy branding for your organization will now show here. And then, once that comes up, I'm now able to see all the applications that are available to me, and I can decide what do I need to download in order to get started for work. So as you can see, this experience is very nice, very clean for an end user to follow, to allow them to be able to get what they need right away to do what they need to do. So as you can see, that's what it looks like to actually go through DEP. So now you might be wondering, how do I actually get started in this? If you are a commercial, education, or government customer, you'll need to go to deploy.apple.com. If you're in education, and this is both K-12 or higher ed, you will be going to school.apple.com. And this had actually changed, so this is new. So anyone in education at all, school.apple.com. Once we have done that, we need to make sure we do have compatible hardware to actually use DEP. So if you were hoping that that Apple II you have sitting around might be able to go through DEP, unfortunately, that is just not going to work. A little too old, sorry. But you're saying, well, Kelly, what about those classic Macs I have sitting around? Those can definitely go through DEP, right? And unfortunately not, sorry. But don't fret. Any Mac that you've purchased on or after March 1st of 2011 will be able to use DEP. So you're going to be good on that front. Next, any Mac that's at least on 10.9 Mavericks will be good to go as well. And also something to note, when you purchase these Macs, you will need to purchase them either directly through Apple or an Apple authorized reseller that supports DEP. And that's very important. If you're not sure if your Apple authorized reseller supports DEP, please ask. Otherwise, you may have an experience that isn't so great. So once we have all of our compatible hardware and operating systems, what does this actually look like once we get this integrated into Jamf? So in here, we have the fancy Jamf Pro version 10. And as you can see, new in version 10, we have those nice breadcrumbs. So you can see where this is located under our settings, global management, device enrollment program. And in here, you will get your DEP token that has been in your Apple portal, and go ahead and upload that into your Jamf Pro server. Once we have done that, the integration is complete, and we are then able to create what we call a pre-stage. And a pre-stage is how we set what that customized user experience will be once they go through that setup assistant. So again, the location, the nice breadcrumbs at the top, new with version 10, we are under the Computers tab, Pre-Stage Enrollments. And in here, it will require that we have our display name, our department, and the support number in case our end user needs help. I've also decided to have the MDM profile mandatory here. You can choose to do whatever you need to. And then scrolling down that page, you can see all the items that we can make available for our end user in that custom setup assistant. So as you can see, the location services that I had my end user go through is one of the options, but there are a lot of different things you can make available or hide depending on what makes sense for your end users and your environment. Once we have set that up, the most important part that I would often see forgotten is actually selecting who is going to go through this custom setup assistant. And I have to say, in my time in support, this was the #1 reason why people would call saying that DEP wasn't connecting to their Macs. So don't forget to actually select the boxes and to save, so that way those Macs know I'm going through this pre-stage. This part is very, very important, so don't forget this. So that's what it looks like to have everything all set up and ready to go on the Jamf side. And now I'd like to go ahead and reintroduce Giannis again to talk about what this looks like in a real-world situation.
Thank you very much. So our journey really with DEP started really at the same time that Apple announced it here in the US. And it was a nice coincidence because we, at the same time, this is back in early 2014, we were looking to introduce a managed Apple service at LSE. There was nothing there before that. We only had a handful of devices. We had about 80 Apple devices altogether that were LSE owned. And these were like 50 Macs, 30 iOS devices. And they were locally supported. They were not managed by anything. We knew, however, that there was a huge demand for Apple devices. And we knew that once we introduced this service, that number would rapidly increase. So the onboarding process was actually quite important because we wanted to get that right. We were interested in the capabilities that DEP would provide us with, in providing a really nice user experience. And we decided although it wasn't available in the UK at the time, we decided to design our workflows with DEP in mind. The device enrollment program became available to Europe in early 2015. So that 1 year gap actually allowed us to see what everyone else in the US was doing, learn from their experiences and the feedback they were providing to the community, and develop some workflows that were based around thin provisioning until we get to the DEP side of things. So fast forward 3 years later, we have a couple of thousand devices. We have 1,000 Mac and 1,000 iOS. And most of them, the vast majority, are in our DEP account. And this is our default way of provisioning devices. This is a bit unusual for a university because, especially on the Mac side of things, we have staff Macs and we have student Macs. But we're in an interesting position where most of our student devices are in fact laptops, and the laptops that we make available to our students through self-service kiosks, if you like, which is that picture on your right-hand side. And we have these facilities dotted around in the place, and a student can go in, swipe their card, enter a PIN that they're provisioned with when they register, and they can take a laptop out, use it, return it, and so on. So even our student devices, we treat them as one-to-one devices. And again, we can leverage the capabilities of DEP, but we obviously don't do the, here's a sealed box with a nice post-it note, which is the image that we all kind of see whenever we talk about DEP. So what does this look like? That's not my slide, sorry.
Green button.
Sorry. Again, what does this look like? So we have 3 different ways of doing the same thing. We do zero touch, which we all know. These are our names, by the way. They don't necessarily mean anything to anyone outside of LSE. We do light touch, and we do a fully configured option. Now, zero touch is very straightforward. It's the user, we give them a box, or we give them a newly sort of wiped device if we're repurposing a device. This is for the user to configure, and we tend to, this isn't our most popular option, believe it or not, but we tend to give these to experienced users, people who have gone through the light touch configuration, or people who don't want us to touch their devices, and we have a few of those. The light touch configuration effectively is the same thing, but we do it with the user. Now, like I said, this is our most popular workflow, and it's where we sit down with the user, and the user will go through the steps that Kelly showed earlier. We do a few more things when the device is enrolled automatically. We configure a few more things. We haven't yet implemented an onboarding screen, like some of the things that you will have seen around the other sessions, like Splash Buddy and so on. But we're looking at that. This actually works very well. Interestingly enough, most of the people who do zero touch are people who have gone through this configuration at least once. And then we do a fully configured device. Again, the process, the technical process is the same. Nothing changes. It's just how you approach what it is you want to achieve. In this case, as you can imagine, this is what we do for our student laptops. So we have one of our technical support staff configuring the device, and again, going through the same steps. They don't need to enroll it. They just need to go through the setup assistant in its customized form. Things happen depending on how we want the device configured, and then the device is ready to go into the cabinet. If we want to wipe it, we have found that sending a remote wipe command is actually fairly easy and painless. The device goes back, it takes a while, it goes back to its kind of out-of-the-box state. We do this, and off we go again. Very rarely we have to take whole, say, cabinets offline and do something like imaging, which we decided not to do, and we still are managing to avoid. I've been talking all this time, and you haven't seen this, right? Okay, fine. So I wanted to talk a bit about challenges and really the technical side of DEP. Once you set it up as per Kelly's instructions, it's very straightforward. Once you set it up and it all works, and you've set up your sort of automation, your pre-staged default and so on, it sort of works very well. And for us, the challenges were around the non-technical side of things, the more kind of culturally embedded problems, and also around processes. And one of them was procurement. Now, DEP works very well when the device actually makes it into your DEP account. Right? If you buy directly from Apple, that's fine. That works, as far as I've seen, 100% of the time. But for the last couple of years, we have not been able to buy from Apple because universities in the UK have to buy from a particular consortium of resellers or vendors, and Apple dropped out. So we were faced with a bit of a challenge. And what we've seen is that every single vendor lets us down. So I suppose the point here is that everything works well if the device is in your DEP account, but to get the device in your DEP account, it's actually a managerial exercise. It's a procurement exercise. You have to kind of reevaluate the whole process. It's a good idea to, if you decide to go DEP only, you kind of have to sit down with your procurement manager and your finance people and your admin people and explain to them how this works, explain to them why it's different, and make sure that you have a process like what we ended up doing, for example, is even through like our support technicians, when they, before they give a device out to someone, they go into Jamf Pro and they make sure that the device is enrolled, well, not enrolled, it's in our DEP account and there's a pre-stage attached to it. We have one pre-stage, which is default for everything, so we can automate, but if the device is not in there, what you're going to do is give someone a box that will never enroll itself, and it's just going to be the same as if they bought it from Apple themselves. So that's one challenge that was a bit of a surprise for us. Managing user expectations is also important because this is new for the users as well. What we've been doing up to the point where Apple introduced DEP, pretty much across the industry, goes back 30 years. IT buys a computer, they set it up, they give it to you. Or if you're a student, okay, fine, you log into a kind of managed machine. But if you have a setup like what we want to do, yeah, it's sort of slightly new. And this managing user expectations leads me to the second challenge that we found. So user-led IT, it's a good thing, right? It's certainly one of the buzzwords. You hear it around in pretty much every session, and that's great. But user-led IT is great for us because we think we're going to implement this fantastic sort of new service. We're going to take away 80% of the process of setting up a device, and this is going to be great for the users. And for the most part, it is. But then this guy sends you an email, right? And effectively saying that, what is this? You gave me a laptop and everything, thank you, but what is all these things that are happening, without me really doing anything? Are you tracking me? Then you reply and you say, no, look, this is this new process, and it's great, it's for you. And he says, well, no. What is this JSS stuff? No. Thank you, but the point here is that this is a new process that is great for us, and we take away a lot of it, but for the users, it's unknown. How many people outside of, say, this building really understand, when you go back to your business, really understand what DEP is, and what zero touch is? And sometimes they don't really care. They want to just get on with things, which is fine. But I think it was, certainly for us, it was our job to try and communicate this as best as we can. Things like publishing documentation, running some workshops, like an Apple user group for people who were a lot more kind of involved, and we have some people who do statistical analysis and programming and so on, and they knew what they were doing and they wanted to kind of feed into that process, and actually it worked very well. And yeah, we did this mistake. Don't throw a policy at someone's face. You say to them, oh no, this is it, this is how you do it, because it doesn't work very well. It's better to just explain it to them. Might take you half an hour, but it works a lot better. And the final challenge, which is more related, this isn't really a workflow challenge as such, but it's more related to setting up DEP. If you haven't done it yet and you're considering it, the old saying, too many cooks spoil the broth, right? Well, there are some broths that require too many cooks, and this is definitely one of them. Just to explain. You go to Apple, you have to work with Apple, you enroll yourself, you set this up. This is also a bit of a process in itself. You do that, you have your management to discuss this with, you have to explain to them why this new way of doing things that is disrupting existing practices will make everyone's life better. You go to InfoSec, which is always a pleasure, and you explain to them, especially in highly regulated environments. I know colleagues from banks who, after years, still haven't managed to get a proper DEP implementation up and running. Networks, always friendly and have to do what InfoSec agreed, if they like. Technicians have to understand this is a new process. They have to understand there's a new way of doing things. And procurement, as per the example earlier, suppliers. If they're good, keep them. If they're not, you have to spend some time. You have to communicate this to people, so you have to work with comms, who again need to understand what DEP is and how to communicate this to their users, or to our users, and users. And this is basically where it never ends, right? It keeps going and going and going. How to overcome. I think obviously every environment is unique, but I think it's our role to take the lead in this. We are the people in the business that understand exactly what the device involvement program is, why, if it's a better idea for your business, why that's so, and try and communicate effectively. There's a lot of selling involved. If you work in an enterprise environment where you have to kind of go and convince the key people in the right places and then go to the people underneath them and so on, this will be an exercise that involves too many people. But there are some benefits, and this is really my last slide. So I don't want to end, but just complain about DEP. There are some clear benefits. There's a very clear element of future-proofing in this. I know, it's every day you hear this, imaging is dead. I don't know if it's dead or not. I don't think it's dead, but I think certainly this is the way forward. By implementing the device involvement program, you are certainly taking a step towards future-proofing your environment, which is also becoming, with every macOS release, it's becoming, let's say, imperative that you do. Zero touch. Zero touch is actually very good. It does work. Kelly's example is very good, but we have examples of people who have had to do the same thing. And also, it's nice to be able to call someone and say, look, your new phone is here. Pick it up whenever you like. You expect them to come within a day or so. 45 seconds later, they're there kind of knocking on the door because they're so excited to just be able to pick something up and go away and set it up themselves. And the user experience, you'll have your difficult users, and I know we have ours, but it is a better experience. The user has more control. They actually, most people I think appreciate, as you said, the Apple experience, unboxing and so on. I don't want to do it anymore. I'm certainly fed up, but I can understand why someone who's just been given a brand new piece of kit would want to do it. And that's it for me, and back to you.
All right, thank you, Giannis.
Thanks.
All right, so now is a really great time to find out when does it make sense for our Macs to use DEP and when does it not. So keeping in mind again, DEP is not all or nothing. You can absolutely have a mix of DEP and non-DEP in your environment. So the first one, if you have a one-to-one relationship with your Mac to the user, DEP is made for this. That magical moment that we were talking about earlier, absolutely, you're gonna wanna use DEP. However, if we have a lab environment, DEP probably not gonna be the best workflow. Again, you're just gonna end up doing all of that setup anyways. That is not gonna be fun. So for a lab environment, I would look to utilize other methods to get that up and running. Next, if your environment has a very fast, stable internet connection, DEP gonna be super slick. However, if you're in an environment where you have very limited or potentially even no internet, DEP does require an internet connection so it can communicate back to Apple. So if we're not able to do that, your end user experience isn't gonna be that great. So I'd look at using other methods, maybe something like carrying actual hard drives and getting your Macs up and running that way. Next, we talked about compatible hardware and operating systems. So again, those old Apple IIs, Mac Classics, not gonna cut it. So anything purchased on or after March 1st, 2011 on at least 10.9 Mavericks, you're gonna be good to go. And lastly, if your Macs have a single partition that need to be set up, DEP work really slick for you. However, if we need to install something like Boot Camp on our secondary partition, DEP cannot set up Boot Camp. So if that's important for you, you might want to look at other methods to make sure that you can get that set up the way that you need to. So that's when DEP makes sense. When it may not, again, can totally use a mix, not all or nothing. So what I would like to talk about now is your to-do list. You can get started on this today. So first, if you are a commercial, enterprise or government customer, deploy.apple.com is where you're gonna wanna go. If you're in education in any way, K-12, higher ed, doesn't matter, school.apple.com is where you will be going to sign up for the device enrollment program. Once you have done that, we'll need to make sure we have our compatible devices purchased again on or after March 1st, 2011, at least 10.9 Mavericks, and purchased directly from Apple or an Apple authorized reseller. Once we have done that, we will then be able to upload our DEP token into our Jamf Pro 10 server. Once we have uploaded our token, we will then be able to create our pre-stage. And our pre-stage, here we go. Once we have that, that's where we set up our custom setup assistant, the different items that we can have our end users either interact with or if we want to hide them. And once we have done that, we want to make sure the most important part, setting the scope, who is actually going to be going through our DEP custom setup assistant. Very, very important. We don't want to forget this. It will be very sad if you forget it. So once we have all of that set up, everything on your end is done, our end users will get their Macs, they'll turn them on, and then they will go through that custom setup experience that you have set up just for them that they're going to love. And by the end, they're going to be managed and enrolled, ready to get right to work without you having to actually touch anything, and the end user gets that really fun experience of actually getting to set this up. So just a recap of what we've all covered today. We had a chance to see what DEP looks like from that end user experience, to see how seamless it can be and how intuitive it could be. Then we talked about the requirements, both purchasing, hardware, and macOS requirements in order to get into the device enrollment program, and also how to enroll into the device enrollment program. We showed you how to actually get this set up in your Jamf Pro 10 server, and then we had Giannis come up to talk about real-world challenges and how he was able to overcome those. And then lastly, we talked about when DEP makes sense for a Mac and when maybe another option would be a better choice. So now you have the action items needed in order to get ready to use this in your own environment. And we want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We are really hoping that this will be helpful for you. And at this time, we'd like to leave up some resources for you in order to get started. Thank you.